Let's start off with the triangle of victimization. This is something that has been put together in different law enforcement and correctional settings because officers have had the opportunity to talk to victims. And if you're going to learn something, unfortunately, the best teachers are former victims. So in order for something bad to take place, a violent attack, there has to be a predator. Okay, so these are your rapists, your armed robbers, serial killers, people of that nature, right? Then you have a victim. Now, the victim can be an unsuspecting victim, or a lot of times maybe they figured it out, but the next piece is involved, and that is opportunity. So you have the unsuspecting or suspecting victim, and then you have the opportunity. And with opportunity, in the predator's eyes, that can mean one of two things. First, that nobody's going to see or hear what's going on. And secondly, unfortunately, today this is huge, there might be someone who sees and hears something, but no one's going to intervene. So when that triangle is complete, someone's going to get hurt. So what our job is the innocent, nice, law-abiding citizen, is to make sure we don't get caught within their triangle. This is their trap. Predators are out there. There was one documentary on TV where, actually I think it was the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary, talking about serial killer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Okay, so his target was gay men. So he would go to the bars and start looking at people. And because he wasn't a physically imposing individual, he would just get them in discussion, have a few drinks, invite them back to his place. The same thing that people do in clubs 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But there would be two attacks. The first attack is actually putting a drug, or the date rape drug of any type, you pick the type, in a drink to make the person pass out. That's an attack. And then there may be a sexual attack and the murder, or it could be chloroform. In his case, come up behind the person, knock them out. That's an attack. And then continue on with more attacks. So when you look at that triangle, it's interesting how there can be stutter steps. One of the girls that I was talking to at one of my seminars, she was a rape victim. And one thing that she told me was that, and she was very confident, she wasn't blaming herself for the attack, but she said, realistically, I now know that when I'm drinking, when anyone's drinking, they are now going to raise their level of being an unsuspecting victim, and the predators can see that. So if you're in a situation or an environment where you look at that opportunity piece, if there is no chance that someone's going to intervene and you've been drinking and you're stumbling or you're using crappy judgment, the predator is going to take advantage of that. And that was a lesson that she tried. She was sharing it with myself, but also the group. So she wasn't blaming herself. And therefore, you never want to blame victims at all, but you want to look at the reality of the situation. Do I want to make it easier for a rapist or a serial killer to get me, or harder? Obviously, you want to make it more challenging for them. So look at your situation that way. And what that triangle of victimization does is it helps you set your level of awareness. Okay? If I'm at home, it's Thanksgiving, and I'm having some drinks with my family, and I'm getting a little wobbly, and I'm not driving anywhere, no big deal. No one at home is going to attack me. But if I'm at that club, let's say, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, back in, the 80s and 90s, and I'm drinking, and there's a Jeffrey Dahmer who takes a liking to Coach Brian, I could be in big trouble. So I need to look at the reality of the situation and try to do whatever I can to minimize the probability that I will be a victim. So go ahead and put some thought to that and see if there's any way that you can shore up some of your behaviors or habits, and or dial in your alertness based on different environments that you're in. The only punch we're going to cover in this video today is the straight blast. You may have heard it as chain punching or Wing Chun blasting. You know, it's got a super long history of effectiveness. The only thing is I don't want you to worry about your footwork too much. All you have to remember is you are throwing a fist in a vertical fashion, rotating one over the other through your target. You want to cut through them like a chainsaw, okay? Vitor Belfort and Vanderlei Silva have been known to just run through people. I've seen Don Fry do it. There's a lot of guys in mixed martial art who have actually used this effectively. Think about it this way. If you are occupying the center zone on your attacker, they're not. So, and you can do it from your passive stance. Please, and you're feigning fear, correct? So, I don't want to fight, and then you launch 100 miles an hour right down that person's throat. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to work that on the bag. We'll go ahead and practice on the dummy, show you the benefits of both, and we'll move on to the next weapon, which is the two-handed push. Just shoving someone out of the way, okay? If you noticed in street fights, the shoves always get in. That's normally what starts the fight physically. You'll see two folks arguing, and normally the aggressor doesn't want to be viewed by everybody as a prick. He wants to have the moral high ground with his friends. So he's got to get you to come at him. So what he'll do is he'll say something embarrassing, boom, get that shove in, and then hopefully you will throw one back, and that's going to be his excuse to attack you. In the military, I would use it when bodyguarding all the time because on a protective service mission, you're just trying to get the hell out of Dodge. Something's gone south. You have your principal here. You're either the AIC or you're on point. And as you're running, boom, you're just hitting people hard in the clavicle or shoulder area to get them out. And hopefully your diamond can punch through that. You're just the tip of that. Watch police officers use the two-handed shove. As long as you're aiming a little bit up and off the center line, you can get a good spin on somebody. We used to use shoves when I was working the door, so that way we could spin them around and get them into some sort of a chokehold or an escort maneuver. It gives you that half beat to distract them. So it's a very, very useful tool. And if you get that shot in quick enough and hard enough, it might cause them to fall down, who knows, so you can get out of town. All right, in this portion of the training, we're going to go over something called CWCT, and that means closest weapon, closest target. And we're talking about our weapons, and we're talking about the attacker's targets. So, closest weapon, closest target. This philosophy works or should take priority about 80% of the time. The remaining 20%, we might explore something called distraction for power principles and options. But for CWCT, what I want to do is take an inventory of my weapons first and then see which of their targets that are being made available to us in a specific moment of time align with our weapons. So I have my heel palms. We talked about those. We have the two-hand push. We talked about the front kicks, whether we're using our front leg or our rear leg, whether it's an oblique kick or a thrust type of kick. We have our elbows, headbutts, finger jabs to the eyes, and those sorts of things. So since I brought it up, for the targets, we have the eyes, we have their nose, we have their throat, sternum, bladder, groin, the knees, or to be specific, I like the top of the shin just below the knee. So that's where I'm going to throw my oblique kick and settle forward. Sometimes I might throw a front stomp kick to that area, but again, that's one of my favorite targets. And you can use this principle as a way to evaluate maybe a technique or a drill that you're working on in class. So you'll run the drill, and then the instructor will say something like, does this support or violate the CWCT principle? And as you go through our techniques and our curriculum, you're going to find that sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no. And that's all built in there by design. So we cover those. Another way you can use the CWCT principle is when you get stuck in a drill, or let's say you're in a technique line and you try to run a technique and you mess it up. Don't just stop and go to the end of the line. Just freeze wherever you're at. And then your partner or your uke can say, okay, what would you do from here? Not what should you have done for the technique. What would you do from here to get to the safest spot? And we talked about that earlier in maybe lesson 1 or 2. The safest spot for us. We're trying to get behind their hands because their hands, we're just going to assume, contain a weapon. So when you're talking about combatives or street fighting, you're not sitting there trying to box it out with somebody or have a fair wrestling match. You're trying to disengage and get to safety. So that's a situation that we are working towards and from. So ideas to ponder. If you're in a passive stance, you can kind of visualize CWCT from right. So you're like, no, please, I'm not looking for any trouble, and they're still moving in. Boom, you flick them in the eyes. Maybe you hit them with a heel palm to the chin. Maybe you decide to run forward into that straight blast and then obtain a clinch. And then you move from a collar tie, swoop around to an overhook in a frame. There's a lot of things you can do using this philosophy. Maybe you've just been shoved. They got the shove in, right? Boom. And you got off, so you bring your hands forward. This is a distraction. So instead, you're going to use your rear leg front direction, and you're going to stick it right top of the shin, below the knee, and just smash it. Your hands are still up, so you can frame. You can continue with heel palms. Maybe you've got a part of their upper arm, let's say their right arm, and you can throw an elbow, come back down to here. There's a lot of things you can do. And there's a lot of ways we primarily flinch, and we have to take that into consideration. Now, some of the things we can use for a setup, let's just look at 2 different ways. We can look at feigning fear, and we can look at a helpful response. So feigning fear just means that as soon as someone starts barking at you, there's an argument on their half, and you know something's going to happen, you just put your hands up and you're like, please, I don't want to get hurt. What can we do to solve this? And this right here is passive in nature. I took a step back, which means now I'm actually in a little bit more of a solid footing, but everybody who saw or who's looking right now, or unfortunately just standing there with their phones recording, you now have evidence that you backed up and you did not want to fight, because you don't want to be what legally is called in a mutual combative situation. We're talking about self-defense. We're talking about getting home safely, protecting ourselves and our loved ones. Okay? So please, I don't want to, and then they jump on you, boom, boom, you hit, and then you move off to their 3 or let's say 9 o'clock. Let's say you've been shoved. Again, you throw that front kick to the shin, just under the knee, and then you can either use your 2-hand push to either one of the shoulders to get by them, or if you still need to put more damage on this person to make the situation safe, you do so. Another setup we can use is just to say, look, I'm sorry, I want to help. I'm sorry, what was that? And when I do that, I've done this especially when I've worked security for different nightclub venues. I'll say, what was that? Because I want to tuck my chin. I'm moving forward towards the aggression, which is important. We face our problems even when they spook us, even when we feel the fear. We face the problem and we move into it. It's a lot safer in most cases than trying to run away, step back, all that kind of stuff. So I protect my chin and my throat line. What is that? And now if you look, my hands are automatically up into the CWCT. So we can use feigning fear, or we can use a helpful response. I can still see their torso. I can see their hands. I can see their hips. I can see if their hands are reaching for a weapon. I can see their hips. So that way, if they're blading off, to hide, which we're going to assume is a weapon, we can respond to that as well. So the hands come up, I look down, that is a submissive act. So everything as far as witnesses are concerned, whether it's cell phone recordings or verbal testimony, this puts you in a better spot. But you know that you're ready to rock and roll if that person makes the wrong move. When you're training these things, you just look at what targets they have available, again, to your weapon. So you kind of take an inventory. On the low line, their shins, you're always going to have your feet. Come up a little bit higher, maybe just above the knee into the thigh. On them, just so I don't confuse you, you have your knees. If your hands are in the low line, you can touch their bladder, you can touch their sternum, and on the high line, you can hit their chin, or even quicker is you can get those eyes. And all these things do is give you an extra half beat in time to get to a safer position. So you want to strike as many of these targets as you can, again, to get offline. Get to their 3, get to their 9. In real life, you don't want to count on pain being a measure of your success, because there's so many angry guys out there, so many tough individuals that when they're angry, they don't feel pain. They're just full of rage at that time. So that's another thing that we can go over in the future. But for now, let's just take that and move on to the next topic in today's lesson.